Thank you so much for joining us today. Our webinar, Reflective Practice in Instructional Decision Making and Student Learning, presented by Dr. Jessica Fuda-Daddio.
Thank you so much. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So I would typically, to start this off, I would play this. I'm going to see if you can hear it. And the media is not found. Okay, so the music that would play whenever you would enter into this room would be RESPECT by Aretha Franklin. And the reason we play that when you enter into a reflective practice presentation, at least when myself and my co-researcher do a presentation on this, is because RESPECT, find out what it means to me. We say REFLECT, find out what it means to me. So it kind of just gets that thought kind of gets us in the mood to talk about reflective practice. And so yes, I am Dr. Jessica Fuda-Daddio. I do work at Kaiser University as a professor in their doctoral program, in their graduate master's program as well. I'm also an advisor for students there. So that's exciting. And then I also go into schools and consult with teachers. And one of the great things about what I do is I get to find out more about them and their reflective practice when they're making decisions for instruction. So I'm going to share a little bit. I want to tell you that I typically would co-present something like this with another researcher that I work with. And she, obviously, it's just me today. So we presented something similar to this at the International Literacy Association. So we do go there quite a bit. And our focus is typically in literacy. However, even with that focus, reflective practice is a natural thing that we do. And so we're going to kind of break that apart a little bit, walk through REFLECT, and talk about those pieces. So I think you will, oops, I may have lost you just a second here. There we go. Okay. All right, so here we go. Okay, so this presentation will focus on the importance of reflection in the area of teaching, reflective practices that enhance the metacognitive nature of teaching, and embracing teachable moments. The teachable moments is the one that is quite interesting. So we're going to get into that as we continue forward. So to start with, it's kind of important to define what reflection actually means. Reflection, when we first hear it many times, we're like, oh, we all reflect on things and think about things. But actually, it's a process, and it's trying to find the answer to the question, why? So for example, if you are, something happens, let's say that you're out somewhere and somebody says something to you, and it kind of hits you emotionally, and you're like, why would they say that to me? Like what? And you begin that process by asking that question, why? And you begin to reflect on it and think about, well, why would that happen? And you're using your background knowledge and your prior experiences, and you're trying to figure out what could have happened to cause this person to say whatever it was they said to you. Now, with reflection, the process is that you need to either allow that reflection to go, like when you realize you can't really find the reason why somebody would say something to you, you could let it go, or you would act on it and ask a question. So it's a process. Many times we get stuck in that reflection that goes into a criticizing ourselves. And that's when you know that you're not reflecting anymore. If you get to a point where you're like, I'm whatever those negative thoughts that might pop into your brain, and then you start to reflect on that and reflect on that, but you're never finishing the full process of reflection. So it's really important to realize that as soon as you get to that moment of becoming critical of yourself, that's when you have to reflect it out. How are you going to change it? How are you going to make it better? And if we think about it instructionally, if we plan this beautiful lesson and we go in and we teach the lesson and it flops. I mean, this happens. Teaching is a messy profession. But you need to take it in, reflect on it, and think about the things that you might do differently the next time, and then do it. Follow through with that, and don't allow yourself to get to that place of being critical of yourself. The other thing to also be aware of when it comes to reflection is we actually can have false reflections. So, and what that means is that if our knowledge base, it's, let's say if you're a newer teacher, you just got a new student in, you may not have enough information to fully come out with a correct reflection of the situation. So what would we do in that situation? We would use our personal experience, what we know. research, we start to look things up, we start to try to figure out what might be causing something to happen. And then also collaboration. And so collaboration is huge because some people have more experiences, and that's okay. And so we pull from them information and we begin to try to figure out how to get through that process of reflection with truth, rather than either critically analyzing ourselves or maybe coming out with a false reflection. So it's kind of more in depth than I think we sometimes think about, but we'll get more into it as we continue forward. So metacognition, which many of you already know what that might mean, but metacognition is to think about how we're thinking. So to be actually conscious of that thought process. And that's, again, tricky because as we live in this busy world, we don't really think about how we're thinking or what's going on in our brains when we're thinking about it. If we look at the second bullet point here, they're components of thinking that are as applicable to the thinking of the teacher as they are to students. So we can see many times the need for students to metacognitively think about what's going on, but it is just as important for teachers too. And a way to show students how to metacognitively think and become more aware of themselves and what they do as learners. The best approach by a teacher is a think aloud. So let's say if you're reading a story, for example, or read aloud, or maybe you are actually sitting next to the student working through something, an assignment of some kind, even math, to look at it and be able to think aloud and tell the student what's going on in your mind. That's quiet typically, but to speak it out loud and tell the student what's happening, we start to allow them to go through that type of process themselves. And so then we hand that thought over to them, and then they can think aloud about what's going on. So we start to develop that metacognitive consciousness to both the teacher and to the student. We become more aware of our learning and more aware of how we're thinking through things. So transfer to instruction. Interestingly, and we're going to talk about this in my next webinar, which is in May, but just the way that we ask questions can actually affect a change in our thought process. So I could ask you, for example, what did you have for lunch today? Pizza. Great. You know, those closed kind of questions. But then we can go about that and open it up. Well, why did you decide that you were going to have pizza? Oh, that's what was in my lunch. That's what I packed. Okay, let's think more about that. So like just by stemming out with some questions to extend the thought process, opening up the question can actually make a difference in the way that people think and make it a little bit more critical, which is definitely something that we are always talking about doing in our schools and with our students, is more critical thought. We do shift through the process to analysis. So even if we're looking at Bloom's taxonomy, we are going up the scale to analysis and evidence. We want to match whatever we're teaching with our students, obviously, to standards, because that is what is expected of us in certain grade levels or as the learning continues, in order to get them ready for real life, for what's outside of school. We expect that we show our students how to think deeper. We show them. We don't tell them. We show them. Anytime and I always find it interesting. You know, I go in, like I said, I consulted a lot of school districts, and one time I watched a lesson where the teacher was teaching reading. Well, of course, right? So as she's teaching reading, she's in a guided reading group. The students are reading their stuff, but interestingly, it's scripted, which is a benefit and a negative depending, but that's not what this presentation is about. So as she's doing this, she gets kind of frustrated. You can see it on her face. She's frustrated because one specific student wasn't able to read the text, even though the text was technically on their level. And afterwards, she asked me, she says, I don't understand. I guess first she tells me, I don't understand. She said, you know, in the morning, this little girl, she goes right through all these words, you know, we put them up to a tune and they're all high frequency words, and she just snaps right through them and she reads every one of them. And she goes, so why can't she read? And I kind of looked at her and I was like, well, okay, so you have words on a transparency or on an overhead that you are using and then it's going to a beat, right? So now we have a student, and high frequency words are words that need to be memorized. They're not words you can sound out. But they're going to a beat. It's almost like singing a song, right? So then you don't really need to look up there and see what that word looks like. You've just memorized it from the beat of how it's being presented. Furthermore, because it's a script, the words never changed. They were always the same words every morning to the same beat. So I don't know if you're thinking like I am, if you're reflecting on this, but the problem is that we haven't taught them how to transfer. You have to teach a student how to transfer. You cannot expect it. So first you need to think about your presentation of words in isolation. Okay, anything you do in isolation, you need to transfer it over to content. You have not done that, don't expect your students to. So the big thing with this student was because of her memorization and the beat, she was unable to actually notice the words in print. So needless to say, this teacher then started to realize this as well. And it's hard when you're in it, right? When you're trying to reflect on things in the moment and you can't see outside of it because you are so involved. That's when that's when you collaborate with other people and you figure out, well, what can I do differently? Because they're looking in. And so that conversation can be really rich. The great thing about this story is that the student, because the teacher started to realize this, she started to change things up. Even though it's to a script, she was able to add some things in to really show transfer and actually shift the student in the area of reading. And actually, if you shift them in reading, you're going to shift them in writing. If you shift them in reading and writing, you shift them in math, science, social studies. Remember, every teacher is a teacher of reading. Another big one is understand your purpose and tell the students. We many times, and it's interesting when I'll ask teachers, why are you teaching this? Well, because that's what's in the standards. That's what's going to be on the state test. This is what the curriculum is that the school gave me. Those are not good answers. I understand them. Please know I do. I was there too. I completely get it. But at the same time, if you're going to teach kids, you're going to teach students, you need to know why you're doing what you're doing beyond the obvious pieces, which is the standards, the curriculum of the school district or whatever that might be. But more so, okay, so I'm teaching this because it's going to help the student, in life. It's going to help the student with the next process, whatever is to come for them. And then you tell the student, don't keep it a secret. Why do they have to learn what it is you're teaching them? And it's not for a grade. It is for development of themselves. And you share that. You share the true purpose behind your teaching. And trust me, the students will start to focus in because now they see purpose themselves. They also see that they're going to be making a difference, not in their next course or not for a state test, but instead in their lives. So it does change things quite a bit, actually, whenever we really take that seriously and tell our students why we're doing what we're doing. So this whole idea of reflection, we have grounded it in Dewey's theory. And Dewey explains one can think reflectively only when one is willing to endure suspense and to undergo the trouble of searching. When you read that, I'm sure there's many ways we can interpret this depending on our background knowledge and what we think about when we think about enduring suspense and undergoing the trouble of searching. But the idea is that we continue to grow. And as teachers, that's what we are. I feel it funny to say we're lifelong learners because we see that all the time. That's what we try to get our students to be too. But it's the truth. When we are teachers, never will we be perfect. Never do we want to be. But we continue to reflect on our practice and continue to move ourselves forward. But you have to want to. You have to want to see things in growth in what we do as teachers, but also for our students as learners. Okay, and the other thing is to realize that there's a depth to reflection. It is not habitually obtained. We can many times, like if you think about it, I don't know, the last time maybe that you were in your car and you went to the store, you went to work, and then you don't even remember driving there because it's just habitual. It's just something you do. That's not the type of reflection that we are talking about, obviously. But there is reflection in that, which is interesting. But what we are talking about is conscious reflection, conscious understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So let me share a little bit. We did some research with some active teachers, technically, again, in the area of literacy. But remember, anything with reading goes everywhere. So it's not about just reading practice. It's about everything that we do as teachers. And so the overview of our research, like the primary outcome is that teachers are reflective in nature But they don't appear to engage in a process. There's no systematic process to actual reflection. And critical reflection is actually very hard to attain anyway. But that's that place beyond reflection where we critically have become to a very analytical decision of where we're going to go. And the development of students' metacognitive processes also was another area that we saw as being somewhat weak. And I mean that in a qualitative sense. So I don't want you to think like we were, but it's metacognitive is it's not a black and white type thing. And I think sometimes that causes it to be a little tricky to understand it and be able to help our students. And then we use, depending on where you're at, there's Marzano that's very popular, as you know, as an evaluation system. And then there's also Danielson. This here mentions Danielson from '96, which is still being used today, maybe a little bit more updated. But in Danielson's work, in the evaluation system she uses, a big component of it, domain number 4, is reflective practice. Is that happening? And what's interesting is many times principals will come in, they'll observe you 1 time, 2 times, depending on whatever your school district does, and then that's it. Maybe they do some walkthroughs after that. So reflection, to be actually useful and an idea of evaluation, is to follow up. And so in the Danielson model, you are to ask a reflective question to the teacher as a principal or whoever is observing. And then that teacher is to, think about it, reflect on it, and then give a written response. So there's faults in it, obviously, but it is definitely a big piece of this evaluation. And it's also a big piece of Marzano's in a certain way. So reflective practice is everywhere. Being a reflective practitioner, that is what we do as teachers. And that's why we found it so powerful and so needed to look at in more of a, I guess right now in a smaller kind of way, really intimate way with our teachers, and then bringing it upward and outward by sharing with others what we have found, but also hitting the note and the importance behind it, no matter what we're doing. So the recognition of the importance of reflection and that it can lead to change and possibly improve teachers, that was noticed in our research. The variety of processes used to reflect, they use a lot of guided questions, seem to help. Talking with others and collaborating seem to help with reflection, and writing things down. So if you take notes, maybe it'll help through that reflective process. Like I said earlier, the process was simplistic. That's what we noted whenever we were looking over the interviews, and not systematic. So not systematic, though, I don't know if that's a wrong thing, but I'm going to try to show you a little bit, or share with you, I guess not show you, but share with you a little bit of how to make it a little more systematic in a sense, so that way you are fully going through that reflective process. And as you heard earlier, you can't fully go through reflection until you act upon your reflection, being sure, of course, that the reflection is true. And teachers did approach the reflection as a process that occurs after instruction. That was extremely interesting, actually, and I bet you're thinking the same thing. Well, of course, something happened. I have to reflect on it. But there's a process, and there's actually a cycle to the reflective practice that happens as teachers. And we're going to get into that as well, actually, next. So what I'm going to do now is take you through the REFLECT. Remember, this goes off of respect. So the first one, regularly respect for in and on instruction to enhance student or teacher and student learning. E, examine your reflective practices and think about bringing them from the subconscious to the conscious mind. F, find your strengths in reflective practice and build on them. L, let your knowledge, training, and experiences guide the depth of your reflection. E, expand your thinking, be open-minded to things. We'll get there. C, collaborate with others to enhance your skills of reflection. And T, take time for quality reflection. I will also share with you that this chart here is actually published in the PA Reads journal. So if you're interested in looking closer at the information I'm sharing with you today, it is actually published. And you'll see some other charts in there that we've created that as we've presented on this, teachers have found extremely helpful. So let's start with this first one, R. Regularly reflect for, in, and on instruction to enhance teaching and student learning. Now, like I told you earlier, many times teachers reflect on their practice. So that's on action. If you look at the left-hand side of your screen, on action, that's after instruction. It's the simplest form because you have time to think about it. the lesson is over. Now you have time to think about what happened, and then, you know, may have some ideas of what you might do differently the next time. The interesting part of that is this. It's on action is after instruction. From the on action, you decide what you're going to do next. That's for action, right? That's before you actually instruct again. Then for action goes into inaction. This is during your instruction. So during your instruction, you're reflecting. You're just not, you may not be consciously reflecting, but you are subconsciously reflecting. What we found in our research is inaction is the hardest type of reflection to do for our teachers, because it's so, either it's so natural to them, or because they're not quite ready to read what's happening in the room. That's what that's all about. So inaction is like whenever you start to notice that your student eyeballs are going up in the air, they're putting their head down, or they seem bored with the content. Maybe they're excited. Maybe that's going on. You know, so you have to be able to read them to know where to go, and then to use that moment to be able to change the way you're teaching. So that's the unfortunate thing of this being a webinar in a sense, because I know that when we've presented on this before, like we watch the people's eyes and we start to reflect on, okay, where are we going next? Maybe we should throw a song on. But, you know, you try to get that attention back as people might look away, or maybe if they are smiling or nodding their heads, that's telling us that we're doing okay. There's moments in teaching where we wish we could press the pause button and take a minute, like, why isn't this working? But we can't. And so inaction, is one that comes with time and experience and being able to collaborate with other people. And as you do that and you build that toolbox of ideas and things, the inaction becomes a little bit easier, but you still want to make yourself conscious about that reflective practice. For action is popular. It's just not really discussed much, because when you're, and I'm going back up to the top here, that's before instruction. So as you're planning your lesson, it is very important to be reflecting on what did happen and what you think might happen. So we're reflecting at that point too. Needless to say, this is cyclical. You have to do one in order to do the next. Now, if in for action, let's say you skip inaction, all I can tell you is that instructionally, you can continue to work in that area in order for your lessons to be even greater, better, more strategic in nature. So this is the idea of reflection: for action, in action, on action. It just keeps going. I bet you didn't realize how much you were reflecting a day. Actually, and to be honest with you, the for, in, and on, it's life too. Like we reflect every day in the same type of way, but we can take that into an instructional or a personal way. So let me just share with you something that you can do for in and on action with, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Tuck Everlasting, but it is an exemplar text according to the Common Core standards. Now, needless to say, I'm well aware that a lot of states are pulling away and doing their own type of standards. But even with that being said, the standard that this one is set to is a standard in every single state standard base. So it works. The Common Core kind of allows us to talk about this a little bit more globally. But anyways, so Tuck Everlasting is an exemplar text for 4th and 5th grade, which I'll be honest with you, that's great that it says that, but this text can be used at any grade level. It just depends on how you decide to bring the depth of thought. So it could definitely be used at the high school level, looking deeper at the characters, or it can be used at a younger level. 3rd grade, I taught it in 3rd grade one time, and it was perfectly fine. The students were very capable to catch on, and I was able to take them further if I felt like we could. But the idea of this text is it's a children's fantasy novel about the good and bad of eternal life. And here's where I would stop and let you think about whether or not you would want eternal life. Typically, when we present this at conferences, it is torn. People are torn by this question. Do you really want to live forever? And some people are like, oh, yeah, for sure. And then some, no. And the reason they don't is because you're going to go through a lot of loss of the people that you love throughout this journey of life. We do that anyway. So when I want to take this and think about how I would break this down for in and on action. So for the Common Core standard, I'm looking at standard 6. And trust me, I know that if you look at your standards, that there's going to be something in literacy that says point of view, or ELA standards, it's going to say point of view. So this would break this down. And this text is actually a perfect text to look at point of view. And the reason is because we have, I'm going to share the story with you here at the beginning, but we have Winnie, who's our character, our little girl at the beginning of the story, and she's talking about where she lives and what's going on and what she's observing. And eventually what happens is she walks back into this wooded area and it kind of opens up, and there's a young boy standing there who's very attractive. And so she looks at him and she's kind of excited by him. You know, she's trying to run away anyway. I guess life was a little tough for her. But anyway, so she goes over to Jeff, and his name is Jesse Tucker. So Jesse Tucker, she goes over and she talks with him for a while. And she wants to take a drink out of this fountain, which, by the way, on a side note, the fountain is the fountain of eternal life. And so Jesse tells her, no, she cannot have a drink out of this fountain. And next thing you know, these horses come along, and it's Jesse's mom, who, of course, sees this little girl who wants to drink out of this fountain, but they know that it's not a smart thing for her to do. And so they do the next best thing, which is to kidnap her. And off they go, and the story continues. But if we just focus on this idea of, here's this little girl, she was going to run away from home, but we all know how that kind of works out well sometimes, you know, where kids think that they don't really want to. It's just like they're going off on a trail or whatever, and they plan to come home. And that's the case of Winnie. But she was now kidnapped. These people weren't trying to hurt her, though. So when we think about just that moment, if we were to stop just in that moment where they take her and they throw her up on the horse, and point of view. So the thought process here, so to begin with, for action, okay? And I want you to be thinking in the back of your minds about, well, how is Jesse feeling? His point of view of the story. Winnie, what is she thinking right now? And then you've got Jesse's mom and her point of view. I mean, like, so each one of them has a different point of view as to why this action happened. And then, but you're going to notice it more. It's going to become clearer as we go through the rest of the story. But when you think about this, there's also a common theme to it as well, because we can assume that there's fear. Given, if we were to make inferences, if I actually had the text in front of you, we can infer that actually everybody's a little bit scared. So it's interesting because it's all about perspective, right? We learn that in life. Again, I'm going to give you purpose. Point of view is what life is. We all have our own perspective, our own point of view of things. It doesn't mean it's right. So you have to be able to stand back and see the full picture. That's the life lesson we would teach in this type of lesson, which I would share with the students, by the way. So my for action, when I'm getting ready to share this part of the story with the students, what is point of view? I'm going to have to really explain what that is. Why is it important for students to know? How will a conversation reveal its importance? This is what I'm reflecting on. These are the questions that for action I'm reflecting on in my brain. What, why, and how? Thinking about this, all right? And then I start my lesson out with my why I'm teaching it to them, this point of view, this idea of perspective in life, and how the characters are going to teach us something. And then we're going to start to have a conversation about point of view. So that's for action. That's what I'm planning for action. Now, how about in the moment? In the moment, what you could do, so let's say if we have that pause button, you could show students an example in the book that shares a point of view and its importance. That's what I would do in this part of the book. Have students discuss why this is important to know. Why would it be important to know about that fountain, about Jesse Tucker, about Winnie, and about the fact that they kidnapped her, and the conversation that happened during that time? Trust me, if they can figure that out, it will connect to the rest of the story. And then I'm gonna, so in the moment, I'm gonna have them confirm each other's thinking, develop thinking further. We're gonna collaborate on our thought process. That's what my plans are for in action. And as I'm in that moment with those students, if they start to get off, or if they start to not be following where I know the story is taking us, I can grab them back in by having questions ready for, more open-ended questions ready for them. So I can plan for inaction, but truly it's a moment. It's in the moment teaching, those teachable moments. That's where inaction happens. And then I would reflect on it. Did they understand what point of view it was? How do I know that they did? And then what steps need to be taken to deepen their understanding even further now? And I can keep with point of view, which I would always keep that in this text, but then I can also kind of extend it out from there as we go further into the chapters of the text. Okay, so it's a constant cycle of reflection, again, in action. So we've got for action, that's before. We've got in action, that's the hardest one, the teachable moment, the aha moment, right there in the moment. And then we have reflecting after the instruction, again, the most comfortable. And the Common Core standards, which again, you would follow your standards for your state, but I can definitely guarantee that point of view is in your standards. So connecting the Common Core, this is what our teachers said. So you can see at the bottom there, it kind of gives you 2010A. We had to label our participants. They're, the teachers are free, or I'm sorry, I apologize, that's not right. This is what the Common Core standard says about it. And this is something I think is important to mention, because the Common Core standards, as they come into play, and as we're also worried about these students passing the test and everything else, I want you to think back to this. The standard is technically a standard. It's what we want to meet by the end of that grade level. However, how you teach it, whatever tools you find necessary, for me, I'd be pulling out Tuck Everlasting and teaching from that book some amazing things that would hit every standard in ELA, and I would be able to do it in a way where students would actually be enticed and excited about the learning. You have that option. Now, that's on a regular basis. Some school districts, like I said, like the one I gave you, the example I gave you earlier, it's very scripted. So you need to find your way to find your voice in your teaching and to really reflect on what this should look like and what you can do to help your students. But the standards were not put in place as your technical curriculum of how to teach. They're there to tell you what needs to be taught. That's it. Okay, now this is where I was going. So these are this is the quotes from the participants, and here's where you can see 12P and 13P2. So we have labeled our people so that way they, their names aren't out there. This is all anonymous. So, but these are some of the things that they shared, reflecting on what should have happened. Everything is always on, right? It's on action, like I said, but then what you could have done for future teachable moments, to be in the moment with your students. Can I just tell you, again, it's the hardest thing to do, but you need to be in the moment with them. Don't worry about what's coming next. Don't worry about what just happened. But when you're teaching, you need to be right there with them in the thick of it all. And trust me, that in-action reflection will come. The lesson plans are a great way to kind of, and I'm looking at the second one here, teaching isn't just a lesson plan. You have to be able to follow your students' thought process and make decisions right then and there. And again, that's going to come down to being in the moment. Reflecting for and on action, again, the two most popular types of reflection, to go back and think about it, you talk to yourself, you focus on the students and their assessments. Maybe it's an informal observation, maybe it's a formal assessment, but either way, you're looking at that, reflecting and thinking about what you can do differently, and then going through the cycle again of reflection. So E, examine your reflective practices and think about bringing them from the subconscious to the conscious mind. Increase your awareness of how your reflection impacts your daily decision making. And this one again, bringing it to the conscious mind. So we subconsciously reflect, like I said before, constantly. You need to be able to bring it to your conscious mind. Be aware of what you're doing. This is where that metacognition comes in too. And start to realize how the way that you reflect on things will impact your daily decisions. So a big thing I also want to share with you is okay, so I was told this statistic, and I think it's quite interesting. 96% of your thoughts are false. I want you all to think about that. Don't heavily reflect about it, but I want you to think about it. If 96% of your thoughts are false, then what's true, right? And then, so anyway, I'm just going to leave that one on you. I want you to think about it. But the idea, again, is be careful not to bring too much of that false thought in. Use things to help guide your reflection. For example, in instruction, it would be what you observed, what you noticed, but also maybe what the students were doing. How would that inform your reflection? Okay. And this is the same Dewey quote as earlier, just about that idea of enduring that suspense. And again, you can't do wrong by reflecting out a little bit incorrectly. it's okay, because what we do is we continue to build on that process and we begin to learn from it. And that's where the power of instruction comes into place, to be able to do that. And again, here, so if we were to examine your reflective practice, just reflection is just looking back, figuring out the pros and cons of what happened. And reflection is what helps us to know whether something is or is not working in our lives, in our instruction, and that type of thing. You want to think outside of the box, refocus your thinking, and be conscious about it. F, find your strengths in reflective practices and build upon them. Set small but realistic goals for improvement. So find your strengths in reflection, right? So all of us think we're kind of a reflective person, but how often have you really sat back and thought about your reflections? It sounds goofy, but truthfully, just think about that. How reflective are you, really? And how about in the moment of something? How reflective are you in the moment? All of us have said that thing, that one thing we probably shouldn't have said, and then we think about it. So in the moment, how reflective are we? And I think another thing here is, you can see, identify the weaknesses. This isn't always about the weaknesses of what we're doing or who we are, but instead try to refocus yourself on some of those strengths as well. What went really well and why'd that go so well? My gosh, and many times it's either you have a passion behind it or you really thought through something and it just worked and it clicked. And reflect on those moments too, because those can be just as powerful as the pieces of what we do that didn't go as well. So let's go back here to, this is the teacher assessment and evaluation. And this is talking about the Danielson model. That's what this teacher was going through with the evaluation process. And a reflection, she's just explaining that it's a huge part. And it does have you reflect on your teaching. Interestingly enough, again, though, many times that reflection is on and for instruction and not so much about that teachable moment. But a principal or an administrator can reassess that. They can definitely ask a question that maybe would be more so in the moment of teaching. But again, it's still going to make you focus on the instruction rather than in the moment, because that's up to you. Okay, F, find your strengths and reflective practices. Oh, I'm still here. Evaluate the criteria. And then, so we already talked about all this, but the 4 levels of reflection: habitual, understanding, reflection, and then there's the big piece, which is the critical reflection. And that's what we build towards as teachers. L, let your knowledge, training, experiences guide the depth of your reflection. So the big thing here is to realize that what we've lived, what we've done, that is how our reflections, like I said, will start to become a little bit more in depth. We begin to understand things a little bit better. I always think, you become a little bit wiser about some decision makings and how you're going to approach things. This shares with you a little bit of the research, the works of Piaget, Vygotsky, and Dewey. They underpin this idea of constructing knowledge based upon experiences. There's so much power in that. But again, in this case too, knowledge, right? So our knowledge base is huge, and that does come through your training. It comes through your experiences, and it comes through research. So if there ever come a part, I even think about just in life, going to the doctor's office, you find something out and you don't even know what it means. So you go home and you get on the internet. Could be good or bad to do that. So you don't want to over research either. You have to find a balance, but definitely let your knowledge and training guide you. You can't go wrong with reflection. You really can't. You just continue to grow. And that's what we do as teachers. So this is just giving you some examples of student teaching, professional development opportunities that help us to rethink about what we're doing. And the climate for reflection within the school. That was something that came out of our interviews as well. Like, what was the climate for you to be reflective in nature? Or are you given a script where you don't really have a lot of room to reflect and make changes? So what's the climate that's going to either help or hinder your reflective practice as an instructor? So expand your thinking, be open-minded to different perspectives and possibilities. This one, I have to tell you, is probably one of the greatest things that we can do as teachers, but also as people, and is to expand, to be open-minded. Even if you don't agree, or you think you don't agree, at least hear what people say, because it will help in the long run to get different perspectives, just like we talked about earlier, point of view. So there's a lot of power in that. Looking at the first bullet point, reflection takes time, knowledge, and careful consideration of external events measured to your internal beliefs. That again is what brings us to this beautiful world of difference. And we have to understand that, especially as teachers. Not everybody has gone through the same things, as you already know, but now make yourself even more so aware of it, and then your instructional decisions coming from that. Reflection is continuous, it's a dynamic process, and is not a static process. Reflections, as you go further, it's funny, I wish I knew then what I know now. How many of you have said that? How many of you have heard it? It is the truth. As we go through life, we become a little bit more understanding of things, and we begin to reflect even maybe a little deeper. And what's interesting too, age has nothing to do with that. It's experiences, it's what we live. That's how our reflections become more dynamic. Don't let yourself stall. Once a person becomes stagnant in his or her thinking, he or she becomes stuck in what was and loses what could be. That's huge, everybody, because I think the thing that you need to remember is how, and I'm sure you've had a moment in your lives where you felt stuck, right? Like you couldn't go anywhere, you can't do anything, you're not good enough, whatever it might be. That's when we lose it. We lose the ability to see what's right in front of us. Don't be that person. Be in the moment of what is, and don't allow the past to decipher what's going to happen in the future. Be here now. And I think that piece of reflection, that's why in-action reflection is so powerful. Be in the moment with your students, take the teachable moments, and know that you're not going to go wrong down that path. And then notice yourself feeling excited, and notice your students growing. But in life as well, like I said, with everything else, just don't become stuck. It's easy for me to say that, but it's super important to remember. Reflection helps teachers improve their practices as they look forward and backwards throughout the process. So again, as teachers, we're always thinking about what's next. We think about what we just did. But again, stay in the moment, because that's where the power is. This is from one of our participants from our study. Starting off with notes, observations along those lines really help building blocks for the reflective practice to better yourself and your teaching. And I thought what was interesting about this one is the end, where she or he says, without reflection, we are repeating the same mistakes. And that right there speaks a lot for the importance and need to continuously reflect, and to try to find out what might work better, or what did work well, and what we can continue doing. We don't want to continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. C, collaborate with others to enhance your skills of reflection. Consult resources. This is another one too, where we can actually learn from each other, to be able to ensure that what we're reflecting about is something worth reflecting about, but also that we are constructing our knowledge base, our after reflection, to help better whatever it is we're trying to do. But collaborative opportunities combined with professional development will create a profound knowledge base that promotes more meaningful instructional decisions. And this in turn will create a positive complexity to the learning within the classroom. And then we just gave you a couple little things here. Professional learning communities are huge. They were very popular a little while back. They're starting to dwindle because of the amount of demands. But I will tell you that having a group of people with a same type of understanding of where you're at can be incredible, to be able to collaborate about students and what to do, how to approach them. And with all of us coming from different perspectives and different places in our knowledge base, we can then become a community that truly works together to help our students. And you're not just reflecting on your own, but you actually have a team. And then I already talked about Marzano and Danielson. And then there's, of course, RTI. And then this one here is just these are two of our participants here, that it just explains their idea of the collaborative process. This actually was one of our themes that came out, with this importance of collaboration, and just being able to get feedback and bouncing ideas off of each other. And I think with teachers, a lot of times, and with people in general, it's hard because we want to know more, but we're scared sometimes to share our thinking, and you want that risk-free environment. to be able to collaborate with others and share your thoughts. So take time for quality reflection, and take steps to guide your own development, right? And I think what our participants were saying here is like have time to kind of clear your mind, and get rid of all the mumble jumble, because that stuff doesn't matter. And that's that critical piece, that what I mean is critical of yourself. Don't go there, because it's not going to benefit you nor anybody that you're around, but instead find that peace within yourself to be able to bring whatever's going on in the instructional world or in life or whatever, and start to think about how to kind of allow that process of reflecting on how to get just to make things better, or to be able to continue to do the great things you're doing. So here are some things that seem to promote reflection and some things that impede. So to promote it, you need quiet, uninterrupted time to reflect. I find that's the best place is in the bathroom where it's quiet and there's nobody around and nobody's going to come in. And it's weird. Or like your car drive, like that's probably where you're like, oh gosh, you know what, this. And that is part of that reflective practice. But you need to find some quiet time, wherever it might be, for as long as you can. And even if it's 5 minutes, you're going to go through a reflection process. What impedes us is the adequate time to reflect, which, like I told you, though, if you can just find 5 minutes to be able to allow yourself to go through a process of taking in that situation, thinking about it within your brain with all those pieces, and then being able to make sure that you bring it out and decide what you can do differently or the same the next time. Promotes emphasis on quality of reflections, in-depth reflections, and what impedes it is need for quantity versus quality of reflections, superficial reflections. So impeding with that idea of superficial reflections, you know, you want to be able to take yourself into a depth of thought, but it's not about the amount of reflections you do a day. It's about truly just taking a moment and really thinking through something that had happened in order to better teach your students and give them the best of you. So going through a quality reflection is going to be better than going through 50 little tiny ones that are just being more critical rather than helpful. An effective system for recording observations and reflections. Now, this one's huge because we teach a lot of lessons a day. So if you do have a lesson that you can record, which trust me, I know it's very intimidating, but it's so worth it. When I was in Ohio State, that was a big thing that they did. I was record us teaching, and then we had to watch it, and you realize what you're doing, and you start to see some of those natural habits you have, and it actually really helps you in that inaction reflection, and you'll notice yourself being more in the moment as you start to learn more about yourself as a teacher. And then let's see, these are some of the participants again sharing their information about just seeing the whole picture. So not just seeing a piece of it, but actually the whole thing, allowing yourself to step back. We talked about that earlier today, that importance of perspective, right? So being able to step back and really see what's happening with my instruction. What are the students really doing? Are they moving forward or aren't they? If I don't know how to move them forward, I can ask for help and reflect on that, and then continue to move myself forward as well to do the best I can do for them. The second one there explains how this person needs to be calmed down. Many times whenever you're, you know, it's so hectic and crazy as you run through a school day that by the end you're just exhausted. But you just need a moment, like I said, calm down, take a step back, and give yourself a good 5 minutes or something to be able to reflect, quality reflection on what's going on and what you can do. And then this one here, the third one, just talks to you about what they like to do, which is taking a deep breath. Personally, I find that I reflect pretty heavily after a yoga class. So that moment where I can quiet out my mind, or also the bathroom, but yoga helps. So just to quiet your mind and allow yourself to really see what's going on and what you can do differently to meet the needs of your students. So REFLECT, that is what this is. And I think, so this was a nice brief kind of conversation about what this would look like. And again, we do have a journal article that is published in PA Reads that you're welcome to get and read and take a look at, just to kind of remind yourselves about the importance of reflection and how that impacts, according to research, according to almost anything that you can read about, it does talk about how reflection can truly help you with your craft of teaching and meeting the needs of students and thinking, that idea of think aloud and metacognitive processes. So you want to continue to reflect. You want to be more conscious of that reflection. But probably most importantly, as I was talking through today, is to be in the moment. And honestly, it's kind of like a life lesson, I feel like, because it's being in the moment of where you are today. Don't worry about what happened yesterday. Don't worry about what's coming tomorrow, but just be in the moment of today. And that's going to make a lot of difference, trust me. And it takes a lot of your worry and your fears away. They say if you focus on the past, you become depressed. If you focus too far in the future, you become anxious. So find a place in the now to be. And that's in life, but in instruction, it's the same idea. Be with your students. It's why you're there, to be there with them and truly give them what you have to offer. Notice what they're doing and then help them move forward. And if you have one or if you have 50 students, the fact of the matter is you can still take that time to be right there with them. So discussion, things for you to think about, because I don't think we have, anyway, so what do you think about this? Is reflection a natural process, a learned process, a personality trait? And why do you think that? Does a combination of practice and knowledge contribute to more effective reflective practices? Why do you think that? Do teachers need reminders to reflect? Think about this. What factors may prompt reflective practices? Motivation. Does the culture of teacher quality evaluation performance standards promote, impede reflective practices? So all things for you to reflect about as you finish watching this webinar. And I want you to think about your goals and how you are going to continue to be more in the moment, more reflective, quality over quantity, but to truly give yourself a break and know that what you're doing is a fabulous thing. Teaching students, continuing to move yourself forward, never let that process end. Then I would play the song for you, but it won't work, I don't think, on the webinar. Nope. So RESPECT, what does it mean to you? And comments and questions.